They are difficult to be around in a friendship, and they act immature for their age. Okay, they have difficulty generating intrinsic motivation for tasks that don't have an immediate payoff. So that's that one marshmallow now, right in front of you. And just having a general level of arousal to be ready. Okay, you come to class, the teacher's talking, she hasn't given an assignment yet. You look and the child with ADHD is starting to fall asleep. It's hard for them to stay alert if things aren't engaging them, and things don't engage them easily. They have that diminished problem-solving ability and flexibility to get around obstacles. This is actually the pattern of high variability in work-related tasks. And that means the quality of their work, the quantity, and the speed of their work. That is very, very common. And this is what causes teachers and parents to think they really could do it. They're just lazy. Because sometimes they will actually do a great job. They will get their work done on time. It'll be neat. It'll be so insightful. And then the next day it's different. So that's also very important. And then situational variation of symptoms. That means one-on-one in a doctor's office, the child is not going to be as hyperactive as they would be in a classroom of other kids. So just those kinds of things matter. This list is just a list of really, really common things that you'll all see. The making careless mistakes. Even when you speak to an ADHD child directly, it seems like, oh, that little stinker, he's ignoring me. They just are not seeming to listen. Failing to follow through on all kinds of things. Instructions, gets the whole assignment wrong, loses things very, very, very frequently. Keys, mobile phones, papers, you name it. If a person has ADHD, it's lost somewhere. And just kind of known as a forgetful person. The hyperactivity, impulsivity part, the hyperactivity part is pretty obvious. It's very difficult for them to take part in activities in kind of a quiet, moderated way. And that being driven by a motor feeling is, you see with those kids. Talking excessively, blurting out answers before the teachers even finish the question, waiting turns for things, interrupting. I mean, we see that with all kinds of kids. With ADHD, it's a real pattern. It's not just, oh, today this child was kind of rude. These are an ongoing pattern. And it's not a pattern that any of us like when we see it in someone else. It makes it hard to manage our classroom and to teach. Okay, so the working memory, that's that keeping things in mind. It's really essential. If you are going to plan a goal in the future, even the near future, you need a working memory that functions. That's really crucial. Related to working memory, though, is it turns out that people with ADHD can't sense or use time as accurately as other people. They're frequently late with things, partly because getting the stuff into their working memory and having a sense of, okay, a sense of awareness. All right, I got that assignment. That was yesterday. They're not thinking like that. This goes into the details then of that internal language, and that internal language, talking to yourself, helps you to follow rules. without internal language, it is very difficult for us to talk to ourselves about, you know, what did the teacher say to do next? Okay, yeah, I'm supposed to wait, and then that kind of thing is very difficult. And it does impact long reading assignments. Children with ADHD have a great difficulty with complicated reading assignments. Regulation of emotion. Usually we tell people, oh, don't internalize everything, express yourself. With ADHD, we say the opposite. Please internalize it. Because they are blurting it out and getting themselves saying things they wish they could take back, saying things that hurt other people's feelings. They are frequently having difficulty with that. So they look really immature for their age. They look like if they're a middle schooler, they look like they're in elementary school, primary school. Even an adult can look pretty immature with that. The reason that that is so important, that emotional difficulty, and Dr. Barkley is kind of the guy in the United States for ADHD. He studied ADHD for more than 30 years. He talks about that this emotional dysregulation is as much a part of ADHD as the hyperactivity, the inattentiveness, that all kids with ADHD have this. The problem is, so we know that ADHD is genetic, it's neurological, it's biological. But what can happen, this condition called oppositional defiant disorder that has excessive anger, frustration, arguing, stubbornness, defiance, a lot. These are very tough kids to have in class. ADHD children have oppositional defiance disorder 11 times more often than the general population. And what they think the reason for that is, so a child with ADHD has trouble with emotional regulation. They are in a household and not doing things the way they should, and they're getting in trouble a lot, and maybe they have an ADHD parent that's getting after them. But whatever, the way that child is parented, and then once they get to school, the way the teacher handles that child, if the child learns over time that they can get their way with emotional outbursts, that engaging in defiant behavior works, that over time, the difficulty with emotional regulation and the experience of using emotion to manipulate, because they haven't been dealt with adequately by the grown-ups around them, can lead to ODD. And it's like there's a difference between those children that are like a motor-driven. They're kind of sweet. They aren't really meaning. You can see, I don't know why I'm over here by the pencil sharpener and I don't even have a pencil. But the ODD kids, by the time that happens, those children are really difficult to deal with. The piece about intrinsic motivation. You will see ADHD kids that are able to do a video game for hours on end. That is very motivating to them. That is something that's really appealing to them. They're getting feedback right then. So that and the arousal. I talked about variability in task or work performance. And that is also down here, that's as much a part of the disorder as the other things we talked about. Problem solving to reach goals. Okay, so what's happening in their brains? In the front of our brain is the prefrontal cortex, and that is the last part of our brain to develop. It has thinking, it has our executive functions, has cognitive control. Those executive functions that are in that part of the brain, attention, intention, intending to do things, initiating things, the working memory, learning, planning, organizing, forethought, thinking ahead, control of emotion, inhibition of behavior, and verbal and nonverbal communication all have big components in that part of the brain. And that's the part of the brain that is most affected by ADHD. There are two other parts that feed into that, but this is the one that the researchers talk about all the time. To give you an idea of executive functions, one of the ways when we talk about if you have trouble, if you have a weak executive function, think of your executive functions as like a conductor in an orchestra. If you have all of these talented players, but they're going to start playing whenever they feel like it, or they're not going to play at all, or they're going to play loud, or they're going to play too quiet, that you need someone to coordinate, to pull all of that together. That is what's missing with ADHD. Another analogy that I've heard people use is like an air traffic controller. If you have all those planes landing and taking off at a big airport, and you don't have somebody up in the tower that's coordinating that, that's saying, whoops, go slower because he's in line ahead of you, and that kind of thing. Those are two analogies to kind of help us see how crucial that piece of us is. Once again, just think of working memory. That is such a crucial piece of a deficit that ADHD children have. Just a little scratch pad, and it turns out very important. Recent brain studies, they've done brain studies with electrical activity, and they show that certain portions of the brain are less active and less mature in people with ADHD. They're under-aroused more than they should be, and they don't respond as quickly to certain kinds of stimulation, especially stimulation that has to do with letting you know you need to stop and inhibit a behavior. They've done studies with blood flow that for some reason that part of the brain is not calling for the blood they need. And then with functional MRIs that cause different parts of the brain to light up, that just reinforces that there are parts of the brain that are not just substantially less active, they also are slightly smaller than would be expected given their developmental age. So everything that we see on the brain research shows that this control piece, a cognitive control, a self-regulation, and inhibition of acting on things is effective. Scientists have long suspected that having too little of a neurotransmitter that's called dopamine might produce ADHD. And actually there's been recent evidence that these things called dopamine transporters, this chemical in the brain, take up too much dopamine before it can be passed to the brain cells to inhibit. So that's actually the stimulant medications that they use for ADHD works with dopamine to help with that. So, implications for treatment. As teachers, as educators, we know how to teach skills. We know how to impart knowledge. What we don't know how to do, what we're not trained to do, is how to alter the environment to help somebody, just like Matthew with cerebral palsy. He needs environmental alterations that are permanent. ADHD kids need an environment that sets them up to be able to deal with or accommodate their ADHD. And it does fall on the classroom teacher, and it's very wearing. Okay, Dr. Barkley, I'm just going to quickly go through. He's got 9 big principles. Rules and instructions to ADHD children have to be extremely clear. They have to be visual, they have to be simple, and they have to be brief. So important that they're visual, written if possible. Children need to have consequences for their behavior in the classroom delivered immediately. If they're supposed to be sitting at their desk doing something, and the thing you're working on with them is, no, you cannot be out of your desk. And you've already done this good thing we know is good, which is let that child have an opportunity to get rid of some of their energy, and you let them have a movement break. If they're up, you've got them right back right then. And if there's a consequence that you've already talked with them about, okay, you're going to miss out on whatever, that happens right then. If they do the right thing, they get reinforced right then. You cannot let there be a lag time. It's really important that it's immediate, because they have trouble with time, with thinking ahead, that kind of thing. What's right in front of them matters. So your consequences need to be immediate for whatever their behavior is, positive or negative. Not just immediately, but they need to get those consequences more frequently than typical kids. You really want, when they're doing well, you not just say, nice job, but you have a program set up. And I do have at the end, there's a listing, there's a PDF of a number of excellent ideas, real pragmatic ideas for teachers in the classroom. But you want to frequently reward them, and if need be, reward generally works. If every once in a while you need to do something negative, it should not be harsh, but it should also be frequent and immediate. Consequences, whether positive or negative, generally have to be a higher magnitude. They have to be not just a smile to say, good job. You have to make a big deal out of it. You really want their attention. They have to feel that, wow, this was good what I did. They really need to feel it. So you've got to be kind of dramatic. If you're not a dramatic teacher, that's something to think about. Okay. And you have to have a pretty varied group of incentives, of positives that you're using. That goes along with, you need to change them out. If it works to give a handful of raisins to a child, let's say you're using that kind of a reinforcement, probably that's only going to work for a week or two. And then you've got to have something else. So as a teacher, you really need to be on top of it'd be difficult if you had ADHD, because you have got to plan ahead and have some things in mind. That's the anticipating you. It's talking, anticipation is the key for the teacher or the parent. You've got to think ahead. And you've got to remember with them to talk out loud about things, to help kids learn, to give themselves self-instructions. And it can feel kind of awkward to a teacher to say, oh, I'm going to go get my cup of tea right now, and then I'm not going to keep it there, I'll put it over here. So you might, usually I would just do it, but that helps kids. This being held publicly accountable, because kids don't have the internal reinforcers, the internal voice, they need external public kinds of things from you to help them change their behavior. And finally, it only works while it's being implemented. Just like I told you, I can't tell you how many times I have seen effective programs put in place. The teacher thinks, well, he's got it now. And after a couple months, it stops and the child's behavior goes right back to where it was. There are two kinds of behavioral interventions. One is to helps kids learn how to manage their high activity level, and also helps the teacher know what kinds of things work to help settle that down. And the other one helps with, once kids begin to have those disruptive behaviors. So kids learn how to use self-talk, and they're taught in a very concrete, reinforced way how to do that. So those two types of behavior therapies. Some kids will have medication along with behavior therapy, but if their ADHD is somewhat mild, often behavior therapy is enough. One of the good reasons for learning some skills about how to handle your ADHD, if you have it, is because someday you'll be a grown-up, and if you have ADHD, it'll be up to you to handle it. You may or may not be on medication at different times, depending on your health insurance or whatever. It's really important for kids to begin to recognize they have something that can be managed, and this is how it's done. Another thing to know, self-regulation is tiring. And research tells us that we have kind of a finite, limited amount of energy for that. All of us, not just people with ADHD. And you need downtime after you have had a stressful time where you're working hard, you're regulating yourself. Kids with ADHD especially, it's tiring for them to, even when they're getting reinforced, to do those things that we're asking them to do. And there are a number of physical kinds of things that can help them kind of replenish and recharge that aren't too in the classroom. Medication is more effective than behavioral interventions in managing the actual symptoms of ADHD. And that's because it's the dopamine piece. It's dealing with that. But when ADHD has any of those other disorders connected to it, and I have to say that probably in the last 3 or 4 years, when I am working with a child with ADHD, almost always they have one of those in conjunction. The behavioral interventions, the behavioral therapy help a lot with those. But for the actual pure ADHD part of it, the medication is the most effective. Medication with ADHD is very rapidly in the system and very rapidly out. So it doesn't build up and you took it yesterday, so you'll be okay today without it. No, it actually has like a 4 hours that it's in, and then out again. You get at noon, you can get another dose, or you can get extended release of it. Some school districts will do things like they have, instead of sitting on a regular desk chair, you have a therapy ball that you sit on. And that helps kids with ADHD, instead of needing to get up and run around the room, they're having to kind of control that ball with their core, and that helps them. They call them motor break boxes, where they have kids every so often are allowed to go get stretch bands, plastic balls, things, and just sit at their desk and deal with that. Preferential seating, meaning sitting up close by the teacher so you can monitor. Not monitor and make them miserable, monitor and help them stay on whatever their program is. Heavy lifting, picking up heavy things, and they can be helpful if you're doing that. That actually is quite helpful to them. And then strenuous activity. All right, now, you're in Turkey. So, in the United States, when I see children with those symptoms and they're failing in school, I talk with the parents, I talk with the teachers. We have an evaluation done, generally by a psychiatrist. The evaluation always includes, it's a psychoeducational evaluation because we want to rule out, are there learning disabilities or cognitive disabilities that are contributing to this. So we have an evaluation that looks at their ability and their achievement. We also have behavior checklists that the parent and the teacher fill out so that we can quantify the areas and how much of a behavior problem they have and where those behaviors occur. And then we meet, go over all that, and come up with a plan. All right, what happens?
I'm from the Methodist Disability Support Office. I'm working there as a research assistant. And actually, I'm mostly experienced in disability issues in higher education rather than the primary school or high schools. But I have some knowledge about these issues also. As far as I know, firstly, all the students in Faculty of Education do some classroom management courses, and they are educated in terms of how to manage students with ADHD in classroom conditions, etc. And while they are working in public schools, for instance, they may be aware of students with ADHD firstly, a classroom teacher, and then this teacher can apply the school counselor firstly in order to make a counseling session with the students. And after school counselor meets with the student, school counselor refers the student to the Guidance Counseling Resource Center, Rehberlik Araştırma Merkezi in Turkish. And in this center, unfortunately, there are no social workers. But there are counselors and special educators. And then in this center, students are evaluated with different tests and diagnosed with different conditions. And with the help of this diagnose and interview, and the center offers an individualized educational program for the students. Then both classroom teacher and school counselor collaboratively tries to conduct this specialized program for the benefit of the students. And also, again, as far as I know, psychiatrists can diagnose people with ADHD, and they mostly suggest some medications. Ritalin, for instance, when you probably go to the pharmacy in Methodist Technical University, probably you won't be able to find any Ritalin. There are many students, there are many adults with ADHD in Turkey also. As a disability support office, what are we doing in Methodist Technical University? Let me briefly explain. We are not specifically doing something for the students with ADHD, but we are trying to handle with disability conditions generally. For instance, when a student applies to the office, we are making a special interview with him or her, and after in this interview, we are trying to learn the official level of the impairment or disability, and also we are asking how she or he experienced this level of the impairment, because the same disability cannot be the same in every individual because of individual differences. And after this special interview, we are making some reasonable accommodations for this